Welcome to the Pennsylvania Trolley Museum's Zoom series, Trolleyology. My name is Kristen Fredrickson. I am the manager of visitor experience here at the museum. Thank you all for joining us this evening. Welcome back to everybody whose familiar faces I see in the little boxes there. And welcome new people. This virtual series features programs typically on Pennsylvania transit history topics, stories about the trolley era, and our collection at the museum that you can experience from home, usually on a Tuesday or a Wednesday night. And we're going to continue these as long as we have presenters. So if you have a show that fits our museum mission or something along those lines, please reach out and let me know. Something about Pennsylvania, trolley era, cities where our streetcars come from. And if you have a program that doesn't quite fit those guidelines, just reach out anyway. Special thanks to Bob, tonight's presenter, who reached out to me with this program. So thank you, thank you. You can see a full list of upcoming presentations on our website at patrolley.org, which I'll share in the chat box in just a few minutes so you can click on it. And I want to extend a very special thank you to those of you who donated when you were registering for tonight's program. We really appreciate your support of our virtual outreach programs. Helps us keep them going. Okay, so really quick, I'll introduce you to our museum. For those who are new here, we were established in 1954 as the Arden Electric Railway by a group of trolley enthusiasts called the Pittsburgh Electric Railway Club. We opened to visitors a few years later in 1963, and we're actually located along the former interurban route between Pittsburgh and Washington, PA. You'll find over 50 trolleys and electric railway cars here. About 20 of them run. And last year we had about 38,000 visitors take the 4-mile scenic ride at the museum. So a couple things that are coming up that I wanted to let everyone know about. If you're local or if you have any family that's local, this weekend we have Pumpkin Patch Trolley. It's actually Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And this year it is a magical pumpkin patch. So it's very exciting. Kids will ride the trolley and we'll give them magical seeds to sprinkle on the pumpkin patch because unfortunately there's no pumpkins when they get there. Then they get back on the trolley, take a ride, and they come back and their pumpkins have grown. So it'll be very exciting. And if you can't make that, we've got Trick or Trolley, which is trick-or-treating around the museum with a lot of our community partners, October 26th and 27th. And if the holiday stuff's not for you, we're open Friday, Saturday, and Sunday through next May when we're going to expand our hours again from 10 to 4. And of course, Santa Trolley's coming up. Can't forget to mention that. There are plenty of dates for Santa Trolley, and the tickets are on sale now. They do always sell out. So if you know anybody who's planning to come, make sure you tell them to get their tickets sooner rather than later, just to make sure they can get the time slot that they're interested in. And then the car on the right there is 1711, all decorated with the lights, which is something that our young volunteers did last year. And I'm hoping they'll do it again because it just looked gorgeous. And lastly, our last Friday's music series is going to be on October 25th at 6 p.m. The band will be Lucky 13. We'll have a food truck. We'll have some adult beverages, which will be very exciting. So come see that. Might be a little chilly, so dress appropriately. And then on November 3rd at 1 p.m., there's no Steelers game, we checked. We have Afternoon with an Artist with Linda Barnicott, who is, she's a local painter, and this is an example of one of her paintings. And she often paints streetcars into her scenes. And she actually consults with one of our volunteers to make sure she gets all the details right, which is just awesome. So she's going to come talk about her art and lead a little gallery walk through the museum. So come on out. We've got lots going on, and I hope you can join us for something. Okay, so now I would like to introduce today's presenter, Bob Wright, who gave me this awesome biography. So I'm just going to read all of it here. So Bob is a lifelong resident of Philadelphia and has been riding transit from nearly day one and continues to do so some 60 years later. As a result of being a part of a family that never owned a car, something not all that uncommon in South Philadelphia where he grew up, he got to ride transit quite a bit and consequently became a fan of the Philadelphia Transportation Company at a very young age. This continued once PTC was purchased by SEPTA. His mother was somewhat proud that he had an excellent knowledge of the SEPTA system and was often asked by friends and relatives how to get somewhere on transit. Bob grew up around the corner from the Route 29 trackless trolley and a few blocks from the Route 50 trolley and half a block from the Route 5 bus, and those last two no longer exist. Bob's interest in transit led him to pursue a degree in civil engineering from the University of Pennsylvania, and he went into the transportation engineering field, where he continues to serve as a consultant for both highway and transit projects. With 45 years of experience in this profession, he's written several articles for publications on Philadelphia transit over the years, and railroads and transit remain a hobby as he continues to photograph and read about transit history. He became a member of PTM this year. Awesome. In his free time, in addition to his transit interests, Bob enjoys gardening, tinkering around the house, walking, bowling, an occasional attempt at golf, and following the Phillies, Eagles, and Flyers. He remains a fan of Big Five college basketball, which he has closely followed since he was a child. He's also an active member of several engineering and professional organizations. So welcome, Bob. At the end of this presentation, we will have a question and answer session with our presenter, but the chat box will be open, so please feel free to enter questions and comments during the show. We can read through those at the end. And just to note, the program is being recorded and will be shared at a later date on our YouTube channel. So let's all keep our microphones muted and videos turned off at this time and throughout the presentation so we can minimize distractions. I'll invite everybody to turn those on at the end. All right, Bob, if you are ready, take it away.
Okay, thank you, Kristen. We'll get this shared and queued up, and away we'll go. Okay, everybody see the screen? We're
Yes.
Good?
Good.
All right, very good. Thanks again, Kristen. That introduction always amazes me. It never sounds like me, but I'll take it. You know, so we'll do what we can do there. And glad to share some information I have from the land of U's and Yiz and the Eagles, especially for those that are the Yinzers and the Stillers fans. But we'll go from there. So we've had trackless trolleys in Philadelphia, as we call them, for 101 years. And I'm going to walk through this. This is not meant to be a comprehensive, detailed history. I know some dates. It's more of an overview of my observations. I'll sprinkle some history in there that I know. We have a lot of photos in here, and again, some of the sources are listed there. NYC Subway, Dave Pearman is always generous enough to share, and I do post some of my stuff on his site. And Philly Trolley through Mike Salagi, also very generous with his sharing. There are some photos in here that have been sent to me. I don't know what the source is. I don't know where they came from. So I can't attribute a source or a photographer. If you see one pop up and you say, hey, that's mine, please let me know. I'm not using it, not getting permission only because I don't know who took it, but I thought it was a good picture for this. To get into this a little bit, again, we have 101 years of continuous trackless service. We're more or less not continuous. There are some years where it didn't happen. As of yesterday, that was yesterday back in 1923, the Route 80 trackless started on Oregon Avenue. And that was about a year and a half before the first PRT bus route started. So this is even older than the buses. This is either the second or third installation of tracklesses in the country, and it hung around. The others didn't manage to hang around. When we get to the part one of this, we'll talk more about that. And again, what this presentation is basically a two-part presentation. The first part, I move that out of the way. Oops. I lost my screen for a minute there. Still see the screen. Let's go from there. Just let me get this back. Sorry, videos.
Yeah, we still see your screen. Can you see?
All right, yeah. I somehow ventured into a different screen here, but let me get out of that. Sorry about this.
That's okay. I found people are very patient in the era of Zoom.
Be about that because I see me. All right, let's keep going here. What did I hit here? Okay, sorry. I
Do
just
you
had,
need to, oh, are you back?
yeah, I'm still here. Yeah, let's, screen sharing. Okay, there it is. I think, okay.
Do you want to try advancing a slide and then going back to see if it's working?
Yeah. Um,
If you want, we can also end the share and then reshare.
yeah, let's try that. Sorry,
Okay,
stop the share. Share. Better. Okay, thank you.
great.
Sorry about the hiccup. Yeah, it's technology and me don't always get along. So anyway, to return to the presentation here, this will be a two-part presentation basically, and I did it again. Okay. Try this again. Something's not working right here. All right, I'm not going to hit any other buttons. This is a two-part presentation. Part one will be the initial years from 1923 till the SEPTA takeover in 1968. Part two is the SEPTA years. This is part two. You didn't miss part one. If you're concerned that, hey, how did I get to part two? We haven't done part one yet. That'll be later on. Okay. Somehow I missed something there. Okay, yeah, this is again part two. This will cover the SEPTA years. And during the SEPTA years, those are the two types of coaches that you would see on the lines. On the left is the yard at Frankfurt Depot. On the right is the open yard at Southern Depot. And again, that's typically what you see, and we'll walk through what those lines are like. I missed one. Okay, sorry. Again, the trackless trolleys as of SEPTA's takeover, which was also just recently had an anniversary. This was on September 30th of 1968. SEPTA consisted, the PTC lines that were taken over, 83 bus routes, about 1,400 buses, more or less. 14 streetcar routes is about 500 or so trolleys. Two of the routes ran as a combination of bus and trolley. One was the Route 6, which ran as a trolley within the city limits, and then the extension to Willow Grove, which stopped in the late 50s, was still a bus route. And the other was the 47 line that came through town on 8th and 9th Streets. That was cut off because of Patco construction at 8th and Market. We had 4 rapid transit routes, again, about 500 cars on each of those. And then the 5 trackless trolley routes had about 120 vehicles that served them. By the end of 1968, it was down to 3 rapid transit routes because the bridge line stopped and Patco took over. And by the middle of 69, Route 47 went totally to bus. So again, that made it 13 streetcar routes, which was not a lucky number for SEPTA. And just go back for a minute, you can see that some of the coaches had the PTC emblem from what they had when PTC operated. There were SEPTA stickers that were stuck over that when SEPTA took over, but this one had an advertisement rack that probably had an ad card in it. So when the ad card was pulled out, that PTC emblem was still there. So that gives you an idea of what that looked like if you don't remember. The trackless routes, again, there were 5 of them when SEPTA took over, 2 in South Philadelphia, the 29 and 79, which operated out of Southern Depot. And Philadelphia Depot is the car barn, garage, whatever you want to call it, district. Philadelphia had 3 trackless trolley routes in North and Northeast Philadelphia, the 59, 66, and 75, which operated out of Frankfurt Depot. They were mainly rapid transit feeders, and we'll get into each route by route and explain that better. And they were at 2 diverse parts of the city, so there was no interconnection between the routes, and they kind of operated as 2 separate systems in a lot of ways, just the way it worked out. There was a fleet of 2 different types of coaches. Basically, the older ones were Brill built, the 200s. They were based both out of Frankfurt and Southern. A group of Marmon Harringtons were purchased in 1948 with a funny series of numbers, and that kind of squeezed into what the bus numbers were at the time. That was sort of an available slot when there were a lot of bus retirements at the time of new buses, so this was sort of wedged into that roster space. These were based at Frankfurt, and then the last Marmons were the 300 series, also based at Frankfurt. They're TC49. Some people will say they're actually TC50s. I see each and see arguments for each, but we'll call them 49s at this point. And that was the last trackless fleet that was produced for any operator until the early 70s in the United States. And the early 70s was when the Toronto trackless fleet started to be converted and with new bodies. It's a different story, but there were no tracklesses built between then and the early 70s. Got a little map here again, courtesy of Mike Salagi, who likes to make maps and is very good at it. And this kind of gives you a reference of where the lines were. The southern lines again, and the south part, South Philadelphia, where the Market Frankfurt L and Broad Street subway crosses City Hall. That's the center part of Philadelphia, Center City. So way up in the northeast at the far end of the Market Frankfurt L was where 59, 66, and 75 operated. And as you can see, there were two lines that were there before, the 61 and 80. The 80 was the first line on Oregon Avenue. The 61 came along later in the early 40s and went up to the Manayunk portion of Northwest Philadelphia from Center City. That was the only route that would actually operate anywhere in downtown in Center City. Again, the others were scattered about. And the five that remains when the SEPTA took over were all post-World War II conversions. They were all streetcar lines at one time. The maximum number of routes that ever operated was 6. That was when, again, 80 and 61 were still operating, 79 was not. And again, when SEPTA took over, there were 5 routes. And that little star there is where yours truly grew up, as Kristen mentioned, not too far, basically right around the corner from the 29, a few blocks from 79. I saw in the chat somebody said the 5 still exists, and as far as I'm concerned, it does not, because it doesn't go where I grew up. The 5 is a much different route these days, but the northern end sort of parallels the L. So that's what's left of the 5 these days. Walk through routes by route here. And again, the 29 was the first post-war conversion that crossed town in South Philadelphia on Morris and Tasker Streets. Before that, it was a streetcar line for many years. It ran in near-side cars that were converted to one-man operation. And there were a couple different reasons the 29 went trackless. One was the track conditions were not so good. There was going to have to be a lot of track work to be implemented to keep it operating. There was a lot of utility work that was needed. It's an older developed part of the city, so a lot of sewers and water mains needed to be replaced. And the near side cars at the time were 30 plus years old. They were not doing well. They were not holding up, so they had to be replaced. So the trackless service actually began in December of 1947 after about 6 months of bus service on the parallel streets just to allow some of the utility work to get done. Again, the trackless line originally followed the car route, which went from Water Street on the east to 28th Street on the west. A few years after the line went trackless, a couple more blocks added on at the west end, and it took that to the ultimate off-street loop at 33rd and Dickinson Street, where the line ultimately ended up. And that ran for many years in that fashion. The first 40 of the Brills were assigned to Southern, used on 29 and 80. They were shared with Route 80. They actually replaced older trackless coaches on 80, but again, that'll be in part 1. Talk more about that. And about midway along the line, there was this Broad Street subway. And again, this became a heavy transfer. This was a major feeder to get people to the subway, especially on the west end. There were not many car lines, so people could ride down and take this to transfer it to the subway or to any number of north-south lines that crisscross on the numbered streets, north-south again. And this was based at Southern Depot. And here's some shots of 29 on Morris and Tasker. The shot over in the lower right corner is pulling into the 33rd and Dickinson Loop. Again, the Brills ran here as long as the service is operated under SEPTA or under PTC and then back into SEPTA. The second route was Route 75. And that again was a crosstown route, mainly on Wyoming Avenue, across upper North Philadelphia, lower Olney, that area. That ran between a new terminal on the west side, right about where Wayne Junction is today on the SEPTA regional rail system. Did a couple of one-way streets in that area across Broad Street and came down on Margaret, Arrett, and Orthodox streets, and eventually to Bridesburg. Again, that was originally a streetcar line that ran the 8,000 series Peter Witt cars, and it went a different direction. It went to about where this point is, where the route breaks up. Part of it goes over the Roosevelt Boulevard here. The 75 car line turned south, came down Fifth Street, west on Erie Avenue to 17th and Erie, and tied into the subway at Erie Avenue. This new portion of the Trackless served some new unserved areas. There were no car lines up here in Logan, so that the 75 took care of that. Again, there were some issues, again, track conditions, utility work, the cars were old. Getting that new alignment west of Fifth Street to serve a new area to get into Logan and the Wayne Junction areas. Gave it a Broad Street subway connection at the Wyoming stop on the subway. And this service began on April 18th of 48. After one day of bus service, it was sort of the car quit on Friday, the wire was installed Saturday, and the trackless just started running on Sunday, basically. This also allowed the city to reverse directions where Arrett and Orthodox were able to change. Arrett and Orthodox sort of run with Arrett westbound and Orthodox eastbound today. Before it was the other way around. And again, way back when, this went all the way into Bridesburg to Richmond Street. In the mid-60s, that stopped because of construction of I-95. That was cut back to the Arrett terminal, and the Route J bus took over that operation east of Frankfort Avenue on 75. The original coaches that went here were the Brills from 241 to 65, and that opened trackless service in Frankfort Depot. And again, there's some pictures of the 75. The Brills operating that picture in the upper left is at the yard at Frankfort Depot. The one at the lower left, 310, is pulling into the Arrett terminal. And the lower right, one of the 400s, is circling the traffic circle at Castor in Wyoming, which is still there. That was one of the few traffic circles in Philadelphia, and there are more there. If you've been in Philadelphia these days, now we have roundabouts, so that's something different. The next one along the line was 59. Again, that was one of the Frankfort routes. That was a car line that was built by the city. That was very unusual. Again, PRT and some purchase properties actually built the system in the city. But when the city built the Frankfort L, it built this streetcar line that went up to Bustleton. And that was numbered 59 in the PRT system. This stretch of Northeast Philadelphia was very much rural and undeveloped. So when this was opened back, when the rail was opened in November of 1922, it was sort of a single track line in many ways, side of the road, on a lot of barely paved roads, narrow roads, through farms and things like that. And there were 5 cars purchased to run this. They were Bernie cars. They became very much inadequate as crowds started to use this line. So PRT at the time put their 5200 series double end cars, one of which pictures there, and one of which is in the PTM collection, car 5326. And they began operation of this line, and PRT and PTC moved the Bernies to other lines over time. So the origins of this conversion, again, this was a combination of new development in Northeast Philadelphia. The track conditions along the line needed replacement, and some roadway construction and widening because the area was being developed. So again, the city stepped in, funded the conversion of the line to Trackless Trolley, bought the fleet of Marmon Harringtons, the 400s for this service. And the Trackless didn't follow the line all the way. The streetcar went all the way up into what's Bustleton, about Lott Avenue today. The Trackless, when it was on Castor Avenue, as far as where it intersected Bustleton at some place called Bell's Corner, a new loop was built. The line was bused past that point to a new bus called the 59B, took over for Bustleton Avenue, went to the north. And this service began in June of 1950 with those 400 series Marmon Harringtons, again, based at Frankfort Depot. There's some pictures of at least a couple of the 300s on the operation. Again, 320 in the left side is coming into our terminal. And you can see on the lower right, one of the 200s stretching to the limit to get past the double parked vehicle on Castor Avenue, which is quite a wide street. This is up around Castor and Cotman. Some of you may remember Litz that was there way back when, one of our faded department stores, no longer around. 66 was the next line in the process here. 66 would turn out to be the longest line that would survive. It's a little over 7 miles in length. It starts at the Bridge Street terminal of the BL, now Frankfurt Transportation Center. Very heavily used car line. Again, another car that used 5200 series double end cars. Oddly enough, it looped at Frankfurt Terminal, excuse me, and then at the northern end of what was called City Line at the end of Frankfurt Avenue in Philadelphia. It went to an off-street facility, but had a double end. It had crossovers there. A loop could have been built and just never happened. There was a lot of talk back then about looping it and introducing PCC cars, but there were some really bad track conditions. Again, that led to the conversion again with addition to it, in addition to the development that was happening up there. And again, at that point, even the 5200 cars were getting worn out in the early 50s. So again, this service began in September of 55. It was a bus line for about a month and a half before the conversion. And the city stepped in again here, purchased the second fleet, the TC-49 Martin Harringtons, the 300 series. That was based at Frankfurt Depot. And again, you can see some of the 59 or the 300s that were used on that route. The 300s had some different features. They had turn signals, as you'll see, on the vehicles. The others did not. And all the tracklesses up until this point had double stream front doors. The 300s actually had double stream rear doors. And again, that was a feature that enabled rear door loading at Frankfurt Terminal. When the coaches would come in, the crowds were such that you could open all the doors and there'd be loaders there to take their transfers or whatever the situation might be. So that was very handy. That got these things loaded and unloaded quickly. And when they got down to the terminal, they were usually packed when they came in. Again, this was a very busy line. The last one was the 79, and the 79 has an odd history. Again, this is on Snyder Avenue in Philadelphia. Goes across town. Snyder Avenue is kind of a busy commercial street from end to end. But this was actually a car line. Snyder Avenue had two streetcar routes on it, the 79 and 81. 79 over time served Snyder Avenue. It had a branch that went to the Navy Yard for a long time, which is down here in extreme South Philadelphia. 81 cut off just west of Broad Street, went out past Yonk Avenue out to where the refineries were in that area at the Schuylkill River. 81, when these were converted, 81 became a bus route and it was combined with the 37 bus, which exists today. 79 just became a bus, and that happened not too long before I was born, and I was born in 57. This happened in October 56. This was, again, a strong feeder to the Broad Street subway. The Broad Street subway at the time terminated at Snyder Avenue. That was a very busy area for passenger exchange among the subway and a couple of bus routes. And again, this was almost dead center of the 79. So there were a lot of people making that transfer going across town from there. But 79, again, had that odd history. At the time, 80 was operating. 80 was out of service in 1960 because of construction on Oregon Avenue. And 80 was converted temporarily to bus. And I put that in quotes because it never came back. But what happened was about the same time, the Route 61 trackless was converted to bus. And there were some surplus coaches. There were some of the 200s that were used on 61 and 80 that were now not that old and could be used for something better. I guess people looked at this, saw that a lot of 79 still had the line poles from the trolley route. There were some minor extensions had to be made at both the east and west ends to get the turnback loops for the trackless. But that was provided. Again, that was started back in 1961. The service started June 61, and this was based at Southern Depot. And again, as you can see, this picture in the upper left is at the east end of 79. Both 29 and 79 served a number of high schools and junior high schools in their area. So when schools were getting out, there were a number of buses that were staged at either end and went into service. And this was probably taken at about that time where the coaches were ready to go pick up the school kids. Again, this was at the eastern layover, just east of Delaware Street, just west of Delaware Avenue, which is now Columbus Boulevard. The lower left is at Broad Street, the subway connection. And Usually they would pull to the curb because they were there for a while. You can see somebody's got their Chevy parked at the curb here, so it couldn't get in. South Philadelphia has some parking problems. I will just leave it at that. Some of you know that, so it hasn't gotten any better over the years. And the lower right, you can see 242 is making a very tight turn at either end. The turnbacks are basically around the triangle across the grid. So the turns to get back on the route from the side street are very severe, and the coaches often had to turn out so they wouldn't dewire. So it took some skill to get the coaches around those corners. So there were a lot of constraints with these when SEPTA took over. And again, this is nothing new. Um, this had operated for a while, but as Kristen mentioned in my bio, when I grew up in South Philadelphia, a lot of people didn't own cars. It's just the way it was. Today, too many people own cars. Again, there are parking problems. And especially on the, as you can see, two of these shots are on the 29 route. Morris and Tasker are very narrow streets. You've got room for one lane of traffic and parking on either side. So a delivery vehicle or somebody getting a coal delivery, and again, people still got coal at this time, that could stop the line. And you can see there's in the upper right, a bunch of 29s are stopped for some reason, could be any reason. So you would have blockages that would stop the service. Again, you can see in the lower left, 29's crossing 23rd Street there on Morris, and again, tight corners, tight streets. For some reason, these were 102-inch wide coaches. All the coaches that were operated by SEPTA, the Trackless, were 102. Most of SEPTA's bus fleet was 96-inch because of the narrow streets. So you didn't have too much play with these. And fortunately, the Brills were a little shorter than the Marmons, but again, that would be a problem that would have to be solved how that operated. And in the lower right, you can see the 75 is coming out of Green Street, right at just before its end at Wayne Junction. That operation's actually been reversed. It goes the other way on Green Street now to get it. So it opens up right at the entrance to the Wayne Junction Regional Rail Station. There were a lot of overhead structures that had to be dealt with. On the right side, you can see two coaches underneath the Frankfurt L. The pull-in from Frankfurt Depot to the Arrett Street routes was beneath the L. So you can see, the 262 up in the top there is the poles are kind of low, followed by a truck. There were often trucks that were a little too high and they pulled the wires down. And that's become a problem that exists till today. And there's been a solution, which we'll talk about in a little while. Again, you can see 305 turning in from the L on that low wire. A lot of dewirements here. There's a switch halfway through. 59s take the left, 75s take it to the right. And again, even today, there's some dewirements because of the way that switch falls within the curve. On 29 and 79, they crossed under the old Pennsylvania Railroad viaduct at 25th Street, which was built back in the 20s to separate that line from the street. And yeah, that was part of the city's grade crossing separation program. So this was built to the dimensions of the 20s. It was very low. You can see the wires stuck under there. Again, a high truck could take the line out of service. Your coaches had to go through carefully. So that remained a problem. That's still there today. That remains a problem to this day. Again, not an easy solution to anything. The vehicle and infrastructure age was also a problem. Again, the vehicles, the newest of the coaches was the 300s. They were 13 years old. The Brills were coming up on their late teenage years at this point. So you had a fleet that was not 65 full vehicles when SEPTA took over because of attrition and cannibalization and things like that over the years, because that's how you had to keep the rest of the fleet running. So it's an interesting shot. And again, when I started taking some of these photos, I had an old cheapy camera. I was a teenager. That's all I got. So some of the pictures are a little fuzzy, but you can see in the lower right, the 324 is parked at Southern Depot and a derelict Brill is behind it, feeding its parts to the brothers in the fleet. 324 was brought to Southern in the mid 70s to test on 29 and 79, and it didn't work out so well. Again, 102 inches wide, 40 feet long, just getting around some of the corners didn't work out. So it was determined that they were going to have to do a few things to make this work. With the fleet came in at a bigger dimension. And as you can see, 370, 317 at the top, there were, vehicular accidents and things like that that had to be dealt with. Vehicles had to be repaired. The lower left is a shot on Castor Avenue when something brought the wires down. And again, wire maintenance was a problem. The wires were getting older, vehicles were getting higher. In some places, the wires sagged and would get hit. So that was becoming an ongoing concern. SEPTA did have a line fleet, had a couple trucks that it used, but again, you had to keep people on 3 shifts because it was on call. So again, most of the time they sat around, didn't do much, but you had to have them there. The vehicle condition also was something to be desired. Again, these are older vehicles. They needed a lot of care and feeding. A lot of, again, bumps and chips and failing paint and things like that over the years that had just been left to happen by PTC. So SEPTA had to deal with this as it went along, and different things happened. Again, they still were running. These vehicles ran very well. They were tanks, but you can see they showed their age and they showed the deterioration and the conditions that were experienced at the time. Visibility became a concern too. Again, when these vehicles were delivered, not too many other vehicles were on the street. As more vehicles came along, it was found that, again, you look at the rear side of the grills, there was the light on the left was sort of a marker light there that stayed lit when it was dark. The one on the right was the stop sign, sort of the brake light. And again, it was the word stop in an amber situation. So it was not easy to see, not all that visible. And at one point, the Pennsylvania has this triangular marker that it puts on things like Amish buggies to say that's a slow moving vehicle. And a lot of the coaches started to get it just because it was reflective. People could see it. And if you were stuck behind that on a street like Tasker Street, you were stuck for a while because, again, there's few places to get around it. You can see on the right there, again, there's a night shot of what the 400s will look like. They have a few more taillights and everything, and the 300s had the additional turn signals. But again, this was something where the red lights were not brake lights. The red lights were sort of just constantly burning markers. Those amber lights above it were the brake lights, and people that drove cars who thought that red was the brake light were a little surprised and could get into situations here. So that would have to be dealt with again, whether the fleet was upgraded or replaced at some point. The depots, again, there were 2 operating at the time. Southern served the 29 and 79, and you can see a picture of 241 coming in off 19th Street to get into the yard after a day of service. In Philadelphia, it was unusual because Trackless was part of the rail system and remains to that day. It's the way operators pick it and everything. It's a separate division from the rest of transit. And the vehicles on the rail division basically remained in service even when they left the route. If they were pulling in or pulling out, they technically could pick up passengers. And what would happen is the vehicles would be signed for this, but a lot of operators would put the blank sign up, and that would make people think, well, it's not in service, they can't take it. But those of us that knew could ride that. So then the operators wouldn't stop you, but they didn't really encourage it either. So this one's coming in after probably an AM run or something, coming back to the barn. It was a little convoluted line that ran through the west side of South Philadelphia. And again, this was the lines themselves were pretty much straight shots, but the depot service was had a couple of convoluted turns here, and that got to be a problem, especially when cars got too close, parked to corners or things like that. It would inhibit the operation somewhat. Part of this pullout was the former Route 80 that would sort of zigzag up here to get to its terminal. So that was used. And again, there were connections both up to 29 and 79. The connection at 79 was at Snyder Avenue, and 29 was at Morrison Tasker. And that offered turn back capabilities too, if there short turns or construction or anything necessitated that. Again, this was a situation at Southern. Mainly a large open storage area on the east side of the barn, and some staging areas on the south side of the property where the coaches usually were able to be found. Up at the other end of Frankfurt, again, the other 3 routes are stored at Frankfurt Depot. This was right next to what everybody called the Bridge and Pratt Terminal. Bridge and Pratt is a misnomer. It should be hyphenated. Those streets don't intersect. Again, the northern end of the Frankfurt L. You had a non-revenue connection under the L down Frankfurt Avenue to get to the Arrett Street routes of 59 and 75. And there was some wire around the block to provide for shop moves and to get in and out of the yard. And you can see 262 was starting down to get to the 75. Just to its right is the 66's loading area at the north end of the terminal. And again, you can see that Frankfurt is was a large open lot. There was some indoor capability for service, but a good place to take pictures. You can see in the upper picture, the L's, the trains from the L could leave the Bridge Pratt station. Their yard was just behind this picture. So this was a train that was either going to the yard or coming back out of the yard to go into service. And you can see in the lower pictures, there's a little rogue bus here, and you're going to say, what is that bus? It's not PTC colors, but SEPTA took over the Red Arrow system, and some of the Red Arrow buses were painted this kind of mint green color. And you might say, well, that's in Upper Darby. That's the other end of the L. What's this bus doing here? Red Arrow actually had an operation in South Jersey, and SEPTA kept that for quite a while. That was the Route 54, and it had a number of branches. And over time, some of the buses for this service got stored at Frankfurt because that was the nearest depot to New Jersey. And that reduced the deadhead mileage. Otherwise, these would have to go out to Upper Darby at the Victory Depot. Okay. So SEPTA, knowing all this, again, figured out what we're going to do with this system. It was a great system. The vehicles ran well. They were maintained well, but they had finite lives. They would not last forever. And just as an aside, you can see on the upper picture, the 66 is pulling off Frankfurt Avenue into its berth at Bridge Pratt. And some of you may remember there were flashing lights and a bell that rang when the 66 came through here to warn the pedestrians. And if you stood there for a while, that bell went off a lot. Again, the 66 was a very frequent route. You'd hear that bell almost constantly when those coaches were pulling in to let off one load and take on another. So SEPTA again started to look at this, ran the vehicles through sort of a mini rehab that came out with a new paint scheme. And again, the paint scheme before this was green below the belt rail and sort of the cream yellow above. The new paint scheme was the same green below, white roof, and then a lighter green window area. And I can't say for sure. I've been told this light green came from paint that was used in the subway and L when SEPTA was trying to phase out the green. This paint was used in subway and elevated stations, and again, they were going to different colors because they color coded the L in the subway. So this green, I guess, became available and started to be plastered onto the tracklesses. So what you would see in addition to that, that was the main spotting feature that could tell a rehab from an older vehicle. You can see the SEPTA decal is starting to get on there with the SEPTA meeple, as people called it. Other features you would see, some of these coaches would have new bumpers, the doors would change out. On the interiors, the seating was reupholstered. Some of them had this yellow vinyl material that was installed instead of the brown material, the brown leather that was used for a long time. And on some of the brills, there was a cross seat just forward of the rear bench. And that was removed, and a longer side bench, longitudinal bench, was put in place of it. Not sure quite why. Again, they only seated about 44. I don't know if that changed that appreciably. I think it still stayed at 44, but some of them had, some of them didn't. And as you can see, some of the coaches that came out of the program. In the lower right, you can see one of the 400s and the new doors. The Marmots had curved glass panels in the doors. The replacement doors went to a squarish one, I guess, easier to cut the glass. But that was another spotting feature that you would see. There were two oddballs in here. Again, both of the upper pictures on the right. The grill was on the 66. That was a 66 had the red slash through it, which was a cutback. This was only going as far as Welsh Road, but this had turned around as it's going southbound now. And you didn't find the 200s on a 66 all that much. That was sort of a rare thing. It was almost always 300, sometimes a 400, but very rarely a 200. And at this point, there weren't many 200s left at Frankfurt anyway, maybe a dozen or so when SEPTA took over. And the picture to its left again, there's on the 66 bars, the 66 has express routing on it for a good deal of its length. And here a 200 is passing a 300, the 200's out on the express wire. And more shots of the vehicle rehab situation. And you can see these vehicles didn't have right-hand mirrors, which was a problem. Some of them did get them installed. You can see in the lower right shot, 237 has one. It's a folding mirror that was put on a lot of the GMs and flexibles because, again, narrow streets, the mirrors had to fold in some places when the doors open. And looks like somebody cannibalized a set of older doors and put the mirror on and got this back into service. Okay, some more, again, a repeat of that 29 shot with some, or 79 shot with some of the rehabs. One vehicle that I know of was tried out in the SEPTA scheme. The SEPTA scheme was a gold color that kind of looked tan. And for this one, 327, the gold or tan was applied below the belt. The cream or yellow was retained at the top. The SEPTA logo here, that sticker became sort of a maroon brown one instead of blue for this before it went to the SEPTA S. And I think this was the only one. I have talked to some people. They said they thought there was another one, but this is the only one that I've seen pictures of. And on the lower shot, that's right at Wayne Junction at the west end of 75. And again, today that has been reversed. That comes in the other way alongside the train station. Vehicle rehab went a step further. And on a 325, this was taken out of service in 1978, extensively rebuilt. The idea was they would rebuild the 300 fleet. Again, there were 40 some that were still in service, extend the lives of those because they were all getting to be, a little elderly, and a new fleet would take the place of the Brills and the 400s. And one thought, again, this is anecdotal. I've never seen this in print, but I was told that the idea was this would keep the 40-foot buses for the coaches for the busier lines, and there could be a 35-foot fleet that could be produced for 29 and 79. Again, those coaches were shorter, not so much for passenger capacity, but again, just for maneuverability on the narrow streets. 325's major feature was chopper control, and you can see the rear windows have been changed a little bit to fit that equipment in there. The process was a slow one. This was brought out and tested. It usually had a supervisor car behind it because it failed quite a bit in the tests. And it was declared sort of not a success, and nothing else was following it. So no other coaches were rebuilt this way. So this coach did get the SEPTA scheme at the time, which was the red and blue big belt around the below the belt rail. New headlights, looked like somebody stole some GM bus headlights for that, the new look bus headlights. But again, this was not repeated. Again, 325 did get out on the line sometimes. Again, usually, sometimes on fan trips, usually followed by a supervisor, but not a success by any means. So the decision was, well, if we want to keep trackless, we need to replace the fleet. SEPTA did decide to order 110 new coaches to replace the existing fleet. Seattle Metro sort of jumped in on an order. They ordered 109 of their own that looked like this. Major difference between them was Seattle's fleet had a single stream rear door. SEPTA's had a double stream. Again, the front door was a single stream, which was different from the tracklesses before. But part of that was that 10 of these coaches would get wheelchair lifts. That'd be the first SEPTA rubber-tired vehicles to get wheelchair lifts. They were at the front door, so that dictated, again, the 102-inch width because anything lesser would not have worked for wheelchairs at the front door. This order was placed in 78. The first coaches arrived in June of 79. 3 of these pictures were early July 79. I used the 29 at the time to go to work and was surprised to see it in operation when I was heading home. So went home, got the camera, and sort of followed it around the rest of the evening and got some shots of it. Another big feature on these is they were air conditioned, so that was well received. Again, the previous ones were not. So that was good for hot weather. So the new fleet started to come in, started to go into service. Again, there's that picture in the lower left is coming in at Frankfurt with the bells and the lights going. So you can picture that or listen to that. Again, the upper right here, 813 shows the double stream doors are open. Again, you can load up at Frankfurt, use the center door, get a loader there to collect the transfers and go from there. Lower right is at Bell's Corner at the end of 59, and the 325 got trotted out for this, probably a fan trip. So again, the new fleet started to go into service just about everywhere. Top picture was at 33rd and Dickinson on 29. The others are at 66. Lower right is at Frankfurt and Kottman. If you follow Philadelphia sports and something good happens with one of the teams, Frankfurt and Kottman's a gathering point where people go and get rowdy and turn over vehicles and things like that. So just as a reference. So again, with the new coaches, the thought was maybe we'll expand the system a little bit. And again, the possibility was there. At the northern end of 66, there was a long considered extension that would go to what was then the Liberty Bell Racetrack, which is up at Woodhaven Road in far northeast Philadelphia. Be about 2 miles of an extension from almost the end of 66 up Knights Road to the track. There was a residential community that was just starting to finally develop up there. Again, some of it had been there for a while, but there was some new development happening. This would get the service to that residential community as well as the racetrack. At the time, racetracks were pretty popular because that's one of the few places you could legally gamble. But you would require totally new infrastructure, new poles, new substations, some right of way probably at this track to get an off-street loop. But again, with the 110 coaches that were purchased, that was taken into consideration that there were enough there to provide that service should that happen. But it did. That's again, there was some residential opposition to that. People just didn't want that. They didn't want the poles or anything, so that kind of went away. And later on, the track went away, and now it's a place called Franklin Mills. That's a big outlet shopping center that's about to go away itself. That's fallen out of favor. It's largely abandoned, and it may become something else at some point. But had the 66 gone there, that would have served Franklin Mills, which again, the number of SEPTA bus routes go there today to take care of the demand from customers. One thing did happen on 66, though, right after the new vehicle started to come along, was SEPTA and the city looked at a program to try to get the extended express service on there. And again, you had 3 wires from just about the terminal up to Kottman, where you could have coaches passing coaches, and then there's a peak hour, peak direction express operation there. This program extended that a little because that added a coordinated traffic signal system on Frankfurt Avenue with vehicular detection. So the tracklesses could send a signal and get an extended green or get longer green time if they needed it, get signal priority. And the 3-wire express turned into 4, so you could have both direction peak operation with expresses. And then it was expanded up to Ron Street, which is about another mile north of Kottman Avenue. So that was able, again, to get some operating efficiencies and take care of the heavy passenger ridership on there. But like anything else, we had a new fleet, and there was a hiccup. There were some electrical problems that came up. Operators were getting shocked when they were putting the poles up to wires and things like that. So the manufacturer had to pull these, do some retrofits, and it took a while because you get 110 vehicles. Some of them were not even delivered at that point, but those that were pulled out of service, kept at the depots. Adjustments were made, but that gave the existing fleet a reprieve. Some of them had been moved out in the storage lots around the city at the time when the new ones came in. But SEPTA, came from PTC. PTC had a history of hanging on to things just because, if there was a situation or something, we would have those vehicles rather than just get rid of them. So they were still available. A lot of them were dragged back into service. You can see in the upper picture, again, some of the Marmons in the Frankfurt lot. In the lower picture, you have some of the Brills back at Southern, which came in to spell those. As these adjustments and repairs were made, the Generals came back into service and began service again. So again, with 66 unable to be extended, and SEPTA looking at another problem in the mid 80s, there was a thought maybe we can use those vehicles somewhere else. And the thought was that, again, this was at a time when SEPTA had gone through some problems with its streetcar network. Again, in 1975, lost over 60 cars at the Woodland Car Barn fire. Some replacements were purchased from Toronto, but they didn't really pan out. They were retired probably early, and the fleet just wasn't there. The pre-war Air PCCs were worn out; they were starting to get scrapped. The Kansas City cars that became the Bicentennial fleet were also ready to be scrapped. And the thought was that there were 112 Kawasaki LRVs, mostly west of the river, serving the subway surface lines. So the North Philadelphia system, as it was called, had to be served somehow. And SEPTA looked at rehabbing the same number of the post-war PCCs, the 2100s and 2700s, to serve three lines. That would take care of the longest lines, 15, 23, and 60. And 60 would be rebuilt to light rail standards along Allegheny Avenue. So there were a couple other routes that were kind of left out, 650, 53, 56. All were still in operation, different parts of the city, all out of Luzerne Depot, and they would have to be converted to bus because there just weren't enough cars. So the thought was, well, let's look at, is there enough trackless? Do we have enough coaches to at least serve some of those routes? And one good thought that came out of that was if you got the 50 line converted, which went up 4th, 5th, and 6th streets across the north-south grid, and both tied into 29 and 79 as well as 75, that you'd finally get that connection between the two systems if that were to be made a trackless route. So again, with the surplus, could you do that? Again, line poles, wire, power was already in place. Paving left a lot to be desired, but there were programs in place to remove the tracks or pave over where you had to. So this would link those the long separated systems. But again, when you started to look at the numbers, this was too expensive, and that went away, unfortunately. And it was a shame because it would be history repeating itself in a lot of ways, because during the latter years of the 53, before it became a PCC line, it was PTC's first PTC line, and actually PRT when that started in 1938. It began being tied to 75 on Sunday. So 53 would come down here over 56, 5th Street, and then serve the rest of 75. So on Sunday service, those lines were linked. So if 53 and 75 were tied together once again, which was one of the proposals, that would repeat something that hadn't happened for many years. But not only, again, that all these car lines go bus, again, the idea for 60 becoming the light rail line in Allegheny Avenue went away because of no funding. But 56 did stay as rail. So 15, 56, and 23 remained as rail. 23 is not shown on here because that had been in rail for many years. That wasn't proposed to be changed. And again, those three lines got the general overhaul fleet or GOH cars. So again, the trackless, again, the possibility of conversion and the expansion again went away. So throughout the 80s into the early 90s, a couple things changed. One is the paint scheme changed. The original paint that was on these is in the lower left on that picture of the 59. SEPTA brought a lot of GM RTS buses and the big Neoplan fleet that Pennsylvania purchased. And those buses came with the same scheme as 866 had down at the bottom, but with a black window treatment. The windows were all black. And over time, that scheme, when the Neoplans especially, was just sort of a SEPTA belt, where the red-blue belt would be just below the belt, at the belt rail area, just below the windows. So some of the tracklesses got painted in the same scheme. Again, that the big expanded band went down to a very narrow band, and with the black window scheme came into effect. It was not a scheme that personally I liked. That didn't last long, fortunately, but moved on. But it changed again. Early 90s, it started again, the black window scheme started to go away. So this is a much cleaner scheme, in my opinion. And a couple of things happened expansion-wise, and I'll go back for a minute. 814 in the upper right is actually at Front and Snyder. It's got for some reason, it's got a 59 destination sign. And the generals had signs for all the lines. And they also had signs that were a little different from most SEPTA vehicles. Well, when SEPTA vehicles still had curtains, you had a route number curtain and then a separate destination curtain. The trackless, because you only had 5 lines, had one curtain that had the combined route number and destinations on them. So this one is at Front and Snyder again. This was a cutback build on 79 because there were some, this is underneath I-95 in South Philadelphia. This cutback was used part of that area under 95 to turn the 79 around. To the east of there, from Water Street down to Delaware Avenue, there was extensive sewer replacement happening. The vehicles had to go out of service below there, so buses were provided for about the last half mile. There were also 2 very busy railroad crossings in that area, and that usually contributed to service delays, especially the second one going east. There was the old B&O line, which became CSX. CSX had a major yard at Snyder Avenue, and again, any trains coming in and out of there would block Snyder Avenue, getting in and out of the yard and doing their switching. So this became handy even after that. The rest of it was open, that if there was a blockage down there, you could have a short turn on 79. The other one is 29 in the lower left. Went to Water Street. There were changes on I-95, and again, that's that elevated highway right there. Some ramps were built. So Water Street, the last block or so between Front and Water Streets, was turned around and turned onto 95 as a ramp, so that the 29s actually were routed onto Front Street, given a new little park, curbside area to lay over, and the wires and all were removed. So the last block of 29 was changed, and 29 became eastbound route only to Front Street, stopped from there. Situated here. One other thing there, when the picture on the upper left, again, that's coming into a City Line Loop on 66. Air conditioning started to fail on these vehicles like they did on a lot of vehicles. At the time, it was a low priority to maintain this. Again, these had opening windows, and it was a higher priority to get vehicles into service. So some of the coaches actually had different air conditioning units added because of those failures. And you can see on top of 857, there's a little what they call Sutrac unit, little blister there. Some of them had much boxier units, but some of these got those units changed. The other thing to keep in mind in this is, again, there were reduced vehicle needs because fewer people were taking transit. The fleet was always too big because of the over purchase for planned extensions. So a lot of vehicles started to go into storage because they just weren't needed. So you can see at the lower left picture here, this is a Germantown depot. That was one area that became storage for surplus coaches. That's where they went, I guess, to live out their days in retirement. But you can see again some of the dark window treatment. The one at the upper right is at Bell's Corner, and there's the 66 in the upper left picture there. And as luck would have it, again, in the late 90s, another paint scheme came along, and that's the paint scheme that's still on SEPTA vehicles till today. So we've had it about 30 some years, keep waiting for something new. But this was, again, adding that SEPTA band at the roof line, basically a white vehicle. But again, you could put more ad space on these and pasted on ads and covers and things like that, full wraps as they call them these days. So that was the last scheme that these vehicles operated under. You can see the back of 897 there in the upper right. There are license plates on these vehicles. Before the generals, these vehicles never had license plates. They were captive vehicles, so under the Pennsylvania Vehicle Code, they didn't need to be licensed vehicles. I'm not sure why the license plates were added. But there's also a state inspection, just like if you have a car in Pennsylvania, you need to get state emissions inspections. There was an inspection program for transit vehicles similar to that. So I think about the same time, that's when they started to getting license plates. I'm not quite again sure why that happened. So there was sort of a last hurrah with the trackless system coming about in the late 90s. Again, the generals were wearing out, the air conditioners were failing. Usually, if that happened in the summertime, buses were substituted only because it was, passenger comfort. It was better to not hear the complaints about no air conditioning. SEPTA looked at the problem underneath the L. Again, that wire beneath the L was a continual problem. It proposed a new non-revenue set of wires along Bridge Street coming west from the depot to Oxford Avenue 159. That was put out there again. That was shelved because of community concerns. Bridge Street did not have a bus route ever. Had a lot of buses using it to pull in and pull out of the depot. But again, the argument could not be made that this was something that residents would just go against. And then the early 2000s, that sort of was the bad years for the system. On 29 in the blue circle just below the existing route, there was some new construction at the west end that would revise the route in the red circle. The existing housing project there would be changed. Morris Street sort of did a little dippy do there, a little turn, and that would be straightened out to reflect the rest of the grid. So the route would change to go straight through on Morris Street rather than make that little curve to follow the street pattern that existed. At the east end, there was some thought to extend 29 beneath 95 onto Delaware Avenue to Pier 70, which was a shopping area at the time. And to do that again, there would be new wire, new poles, and everything. And SEPTA was sort of looking at this and saying, well, we're not sure we're going to do that. So 29 went to bus. And again, that was able to serve the new alignment of Morris Street on the west end and get to Pier 70 on the east end. And again, that was sort of a temporary thing, and we'll see what happens as things go along. Same time, 2002, Frankfurt Terminal, the old Bridge Pratt terminal was going to be completely rebuilt. That was a big bus terminal surrounding Frankfurt Depot. The loading docks and all would be changed. Again, the motivation for that was pedestrian safety because there were a lot of people walking across bus loading areas where buses would exit onto Frankfurt Avenue, a lot of random buses going onto Frankfurt Avenue. So this would take care of the problem, moving that all internal within the depot, within the depot area and the terminal area. But that would require about 3 or 4 years of reconstruction. One of the main features of that was the L was actually rerouted from Frankfurt Avenue right into the terminal. So about a block and a half of Frankfurt Avenue finally saw daylight after 100 some years of being in the shadow of the L eventually. So again, that was a change. But to do that, the trackless yard had to be impacted. So 59, 66, and 75, again, were temporarily, quote unquote, converted to bus. That left 79. That stayed on for a little longer. And then that was just, again, temporarily changed to a bus, and all the generals were removed because they had been worn out. And the trackless service remained the rail division, even though it was operated by rubber-tired diesel vehicles, oddly enough. And again, with the same different picks and everything from the rest of the system. So the trackless system went dormant at that point. Again, there were still trackless routes. There's still a rail division, just no trackless service because the vehicles were all being disposed of. So Frankfurt Terminal, again, transformed from the Bridge Pratt L station into Frankfurt Transportation Center. That was completed in 2005. The trackless yard was rebuilt. It became much smaller because the fleet was envisioned to be smaller, and it was reversed, where vehicles came in from the west and were pointed east. Now they would come in from the east and point west. So when the vehicles came, and again, there were no vehicles at the time when the terminal reopened. FTA, Federal Transit, had made a significant investment in the terminal, spent a lot of money on a trackless yard, and it said, we spent all this money on trackless infrastructure, so you better get trackless service back with trackless coaches. And SEPTA sort of hemmed and hawed a little bit, and eventually said, okay, we'll do it. Placed an order with New Flyer in the mid 2000s for 38 low floor coaches. Will look exactly like the New Flyer low floor buses that it had. And they first started showing up in 2007. The order was 38, and there was an option for 22 for the southern routes, but the option was not exercised. The 38 were deemed sufficient for the Frankfurt routes, and that was a little questionable too, because again, before when the Mormons and the handful of Brills were there were about 60 coaches for the 3 lines. There were about 45 that were needed with the generals. Now we're down to 38. Again, part of that was the reduced ridership, especially on 75, which the neighborhood was having a lot of misfortune. Unfortunately, the ridership went way down. So the 38 was deemed as enough. And again, Southern would remain bused temporarily. So the first coaches showed up. The major feature on these is they were dual powered. They had a small diesel where they could run out from the wires if they needed to. And again, you can see in the pictures here on the left, the new Trackless yard. There are buses here right now because picture on the upper right is where the Tracklesses were there as they were coming in. You can see one of them's right alongside the wall at the Frankfurt yard alongside Bridge Street. Tracklesses were interesting. They had rear windows, so you can see the back of 821 here having a window. Again, a license plate there. That's an out-of-state plate, so this was probably delivered under power coming that way. And again, this was a dual powered feed, so this was something that was viewed again. There were no more blockages. If you had something where the delivery vehicle or something was blocking the line, you could pull the poles, get around it. If there was a wire failure, same thing. Anything with the overhead having problems, switch failure. So there was some limited capability that was viewed as good. Interestingly, as you can see on the lower right, single stream doors, entry and exit. For the first time when the trackless fleet since World War II. Again, that option was not exercised for the additional vehicles to go to Southern. Again, the dual power was viewed as an advantage, but it's not a new technology. Again, easier to get around blockages. You can have pull in and pull out wires that were troublesome, like under the L, could be removed, and they eventually were. Some of the short turn loops were dewired. Again, lower the maintenance liability and responsibility. And shop moves made it easier. A lot of these vehicles are taken to Germantown Depot, which is no longer an operating depot, but some service and painting and things are done there. So easier than towing these, you can just drive them under their own power over to Germantown across town. As I mentioned, though, it's not a new technology. If you're familiar with what Public Service of New Jersey, now New Jersey Transit did on many lines, mainly in North Jersey, but some across the river from us in Philadelphia, they converted some of their lines to trackless, which were called all service vehicles or ASVs. And these could raise poles and operate by electric power where they could, where the wires ended. They could drop the poles and operate as gas powered. There were a couple of diesels that they had. So again, this was technology from the early 30s, again, repeating itself in the early 2000s. So not by any means a new technology. And again, you can see the routes got out, the new buses got out on the routes, did their thing, were well received, again, air conditioned, sealed windows, so the air conditioner had to work, but again, technology has changed. Air conditioning is a little more reliable these days. Some shots of that were taken 66 down below and lower left and lower right are at the Frankfurt terminal, and they're part of their new berths there. The original terminal building that was always there is still there. That's historic. And 801 on the right there is coming out of the terminal onto Frankfurt Avenue, going up to Gregg Street, which is a short turn. Picture of 802, just a note, again, these are the flip dot type signs, so not curtains anymore. And somewhere along the line, City Line was changed. Now it goes to Frankfurt and Knights, which is basically the same place, but not called Frankfurt Avenue City Line anymore. As the same as in the upper right, the 75 goes to Wayne Junction, not Wayne and Windrum anymore. Same place, just different name. 59 again at the Bell's Corner Loop. I believe that's still the designation that was Castor and Bustleton for many years on the signs. Now it's shown as that. Lower left picture, you can see again at the yard, the coaches are pointed to the west now instead of to the east. And the Frankfurt Transportation Center, the new L platform, or should I call it the Blue Line or Market Frankfurt Line, you can see the roof of the terminal station of the L in the background there. And yeah, they never got to Southern, but I took a fan trip once, and the operator was nice enough to put up a sign for Front and Tasker, the old 29 terminal. It was nice. Again, brought back some memories of when these things, well, these didn't, but Tracklesses did run on 29, and a little teaser that we're never going to see them there, unfortunately, more than likely. So it's just not happening. But to substitute, SEPTA tried a couple different things. People complained about the trackless not coming back. They were very dependable. They didn't want diesels there. They again, didn't have the emissions problems or anything that diesel buses had. Electric, no fumes, no smoke, no smell. So SEPTA sort of relented, and right after the new tracklesses came along, they bought two small fleets of hybrid buses, and you could tell the hybrids that are all in the 5800 series. Again, the new flyer, low floors, most of the SEPTA's fleet these days. But the numbers in the 5800 series had the prefix H, which was, I guess, the hybrid designation. And they had this big blister on the roof, which was part of the power system. So again, these were purchased to put on 29 and 79 as the interim vehicles. That worked out fairly well. Again, most of SEPTA's bus fleet is now hybrid anyway. So what's operating there today is a hybrid vehicle. But later on, back about 2017 or so, put out an order for 25 battery buses. And these again would serve 29 and 79 out of Southern Depot, placed into service in 2019. Did not fare well. There have been some issues with frames and some issues with battery storage. They were pulled out of service a couple of years ago. One actually just spontaneously combusted. As you can see in the lower right, 912 just caught fire one day. They pulled it out of the bay and put the fire out. SEPTA is now in legal proceedings to try to do something with these vehicles to get them either back into service, get them repaired, or get their money back. So that's an ongoing saga right now. If you know SEPTA, and SEPTA again is yes, near and dear to me because I've spent a lot of my time in my life on it, still do today. SEPTA is not a great preservation agency. SEPTA does not save things. It does reluctantly. It does not take care of what it saves. It's very sad that the Pennsylvania Trolley Museum has a lot of Philadelphia cars because SEPTA doesn't preserve anything. So if I'm in Philadelphia and I want to come see the cars that I never rode because they stopped running before I was born, I have to travel across state to see them. So it's kind of strikes me as odd. I mean, I'll make the trip if I have to, but it would be nice if we had a couple locally. What happened with a couple of the Brills, you can see in some of the pictures of the Brills here. These are all at the Shoreline Museum, also known as the Branford Museum up in Connecticut. So again, a few more 100 miles away, they preserved 205 and 210. The weed picture was a picture back in the 90s when I visited there, and that's the same picture of 205. I was back there in the mid 2010s and got the left and right extreme pictures of what I think is 210 undergoing restoration. I don't know what the progress of that has been, but again, not sure where those red fixtures came from, where the headlights went. And 336 is another one that's been preserved up at Kennebunkport at the Seashore Museum. But again, none of these, there's a private collector who has a number of these down in the Jersey Shore area. But SEPTA has none of them, again, didn't preserve any of the generals, probably will not preserve any of the new flyers when the time comes. And speaking of when the time comes, and the prognosis today is you've got three lines. They operate with the current fleet. SEPTA is looking at, they put those through a major rehab a few years ago. They're looking at replacing these, probably will start that process next year. And the question of what happens with the southern routes is still out. It's just not sure. The SEPTA management right now does not take kindly to overhead wires and maintenance, so not sure anything's going to happen trackless wise. Maybe the Proterra fleet will return, but that's where things stand right now. And with that, I hope you enjoyed the presentation. Any questions or comments or anything that we can respond to, be glad to do so.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Bob.
Sure.
If you want to take a moment to scroll through some of the chat while I take over the share here and let people
Okay.
know what's coming up. In a few minutes, I will let people unmute themselves and pose some questions, but there were some really interesting ones in the chat and we'll get to those. But first, actually, in a couple weeks from now, October 29th at 7 o'clock, we will have a West Penn Railways presentation from Harvey Lehner. This will not be recorded at the request of the presenter. So join us live for that one if you want to see it. And then November 20th, George Gula is back with Electric Cars in the Electric City, a Scranton presentation. So that should be very exciting. And then one more thing before we get to questions. Thank you again for joining us, both you, Bob, for taking the time to share this, and those of you for joining us, especially those who donated tonight. If you're interested in supporting the museum, either as a member, a volunteer, or a donor, you can go to patrolley.org/support. Okay, actually, there was a very early comment that I thought was just interesting from Louise and Helen, who said, our grandfather was the motorman in Bustleton and drove the first line up into Bustleton, November 1922, and the last line in the 1950s. That's pretty neat. And then any thoughts on doors? So one Kirk says, why did PTC opt for outward folding front doors on their trackless when they opted for inward folding doors on their PCCs? I know you talked about some of the doors in the SEPTA era. Any thoughts on the PTC doors?
Yeah, doors are very, again, the narrow streets sort of dictated a lot of that. And the near side cars, you had one half of the front door folded in and the other folded out. And those changed radically over the years and mostly folding out. I did ask this question once, and it was one of these things that when the 61 was converted, they bought a fleet of smaller Brills. And the cars on the 61, usually the last cars in there were near sides, which had, again, the variable one in, one out. And for some reason, again, the doors couldn't really fit with the steps, from what I was told, on those older Brills. So they had to open out. With the PCCs, again, you were on tracks, you could open in, there was a little more space, but apparently there was a space issue. And I don't know if that's what forced that, but again, another thought there was sometimes before the parking problem started to come along, you could get to the curb. And opening, having the doors fold out wasn't that big an issue, that if you were at the curb, they weren't opening up and hitting a vehicle or something. Or you can move further up in a crosswalk where they wouldn't hit something. But I don't really know for sure what the answer is there. Again, that's some of what I've heard over the years.
Okay. Some comments about how interesting it would be to see the interiors of these vehicles. I know most people were focused on photographing the outsides of these back in the day.
Yeah,
So.
that was, and I will say, I like I said, when I started out, I was a teenager with a cheapy little camera and took some interior shots, which never worked out because you had to use a flash, so it was really bright at the front end and really dark at the back end. So getting an idea of trying to get a good picture with a cheap camera just didn't work. But in putting this together, I did try to look around and see if we had anything like that. Didn't really find anything good, but I can try that for part two, or part one, I guess is.
Oh yeah.
See if we can find more. So there are a couple, but like I said, I never saw the interior 325, so I don't know if that changed at all. I was told it didn't, except for the yellow seats that were coming, at the time. So, but yeah, the seat layout was pretty much standard. If you rode on one of the Green Hornets, which was the old GM old looks, they all had the same basic seat layout, and that the tracklesses were about the same. Behind the rear door, you had longitudinal seats because the thought was, people were lining up to get off. So that just the maximum flow there. But like I said, if I could find a picture when we do part one, or pictures, we will certainly include those.
Sure. And thanks to those of you color commentators for providing some additional context. Gigi and Steve and David and Matt Non, who reports that Branford has made one of their Philadelphia Brill coaches operable again, that it has been test run, and the Friends of Philly Trolleys provided some financial support. So that's nice to hear. Let's see, lots of nice comments coming in. There was a question whether IRM, Illinois Railway Museum, has any trackless trolleys, but yes, but maybe not Philadelphia ones.
Yeah, no Philly. They have some Chicago.
Okay.
I forget there are others, but not
Yes.
any
Yeah.
Philadelphia to my knowledge. Yeah.
Okay. Let me let folks unmute themselves here. Okay. If you have any questions or comments for Bob directly, you should be able to unmute yourself. Okay. Any questions?
Yeah, I just saw one about the white scheme, and yeah, that's like I said, SEPTA's had the same scheme since 1997, and we're all tired of it. And apparently, it's just easy to maintain. That's that. You know, and you can throw the wraps and everything on them, and they don't pull anything off, and it's kind
That
of a
was
boring.
general manager Mike Burns,
Yeah,
and he
yeah,
went
and
Philadelphia to San Francisco, did exactly the same thing for the
yeah,
exact same reason, because they have to simplify the repaint in the shop.
yeah. And then the other argument here is it's for visibility, and there's all kinds of different cars on the road. We can see them. I mean, it's just, you know, if you go to Toronto, everything's dark red on the buses, and people see them. So it's just I don't know. Yeah, again, SEPTA management. I don't want to make any criticisms here, but I'll offer my opinion that yeah, SEPTA management, yeah, not they run vehicles. That's about it. You know, as
And
far
from
as
your
yeah,
photos, it looks like they had the, what do they call them? Those ad slots
yeah,
on the sides, like on and off over the years.
yeah. At one point in the late '70s and early '80s, SEPTA just got rid of all the exterior advertising, which was great. Because the racks that they added on sometimes got caught up in the bus washers and things like that and caused problems. And then it came back, but when it came back, a lot of them were sort of the paste on and wrapped ones that never looked nice. And then when you pull those off, they pull other things off. So and they don't, you know, they cover windows so you can't see into vehicles. You can see out if you're in it, but they don't always come off the windows when they pull them off. So you know you leave some of the adhesive behind, and it's kind of it's unfortunate, but yeah. But again, in a time when you know, it's, especially in Pennsylvania, transit funding is you know again elusive. You have to get revenue however you can. So ads are a source of revenue, and you know you can understand that, but you just wish that you know you didn't have them. It's just okay. I see. There's a question I've seen Captain Kirk ask about that Frankfurt and Gregg ever existed at the intersection. And I've seen all kinds of arguments about this. Gregg Street is not physically there, but it's on, it's we call paper street. It's there if somebody ever wants to build it. The right of way's there. And the loop is actually built in the street right away. So that became Gregg Street because it's at one. This was built at the end of toward the end of World War II, and was actually a loop, so the cars could loop there. And that was, you know, again, you could have operated PCCs if you wanted to at least that far. And I've been told some fan trips went there, but Gregg Street was supposed to be built, it just never was. So that's still on the sign. So
A question from Thomas from a few minutes ago about the numbering scheme. Again, 201, 471 to 498, and 301 to
yeah,
343.
yeah. Get to that.
Oh, okay, sorry. It's like at the very bottom.
There it is. Yeah, can I go over that again? Yeah. Um, I see the question from Tom. The yeah, 201 to 265. That was the yes. PTC never used 100 when they started their series. Yeah, they never used the double zero. It always started at one for some reason. But if you look at PTC's bus roster, especially, you know, as PTC took over, they bought a lot of demo buses and small orders, and they kind of wedged them into this numbering scheme between like 500 and 1900. So those numbers are all over the place. And as new buses started to come in after the war, they didn't have space, and you know, the numbering scheme even got more complicated. So 201 was there. There were double deckers that were being phased out. They were in the 200 series. So the 201, yeah, the 200 series Brills took that. But there was a little space at the end of the 400 series, which is also double deckers, and they for some reason shoehorned this in there. And I think there were even a couple of double numbers for a while with some of the older, you know, the double deckers hung around. So that just got into that numbering scheme somehow. Now I was also told, you know, the city bought these and it tried to number them into its vehicle system, and that sort of fit too. So I don't know for sure. I think more of how it's worked with PTC. The 300s again, that was single deck vehicles that were retired. They were pre-war vehicles, buses, and 300 series opened up. So I guess that's how the 300 Mormons fell into that. So
Yeah, he says, why are the TC numbers not sequential?
Yeah, I think it's just the way the roster worked out where they found,
Yeah.
they shoehorned the numbers in, but, when SEPTA took over, and again, this is anecdotal, I can't cite a source, but I was told that they were all gonna be renumbered sort of sequentially, like starting at 1 or 100 or something, and it never happened. And again, following that odd sort of, mindset, the current, low floor vehicles are in the 800s. And the last of the Marmon or the Generals were on the 800 series, so they reused the 800s again, and yeah, just not sure why. There's plenty of numbers, but again, they got reused somehow.
Property accounting.
Yeah,
Can I
yeah,
tell
and
you
I
a
do.
little story
Just,
about the AM General trackless trolleys years ago?
yeah,
45 years ago, this coming month, November 1979, I was assigned to a Flyers game. So I spent a day down in South Philly on the Broad Street subway going from city center down toward the Spectrum. The Broad Street subway car I was in had a hole in the floor. That was the original fleet from
yeah. That
1928.
was
It was sort of falling apart back then.
that was not unusual. Yeah,
I changed to go upstairs to a trackless trolley on the 29, the Morris Tasker.
Mhm.
The trackless trolley was a Brill. It had 2 holes in the floor.
Yeah,
As you're driving along, it was also missing some seats. It was basically a general mess. And then the next day, I took just for fun, I took a ride up to the 75, and that was a huge Marmon. And the driver was going down the road. He had to hold the driving wheel sideways to keep the bus to go straight.
yeah. Those were the bad old days.
What that's what things looked like 45 years ago from now.
I remember one of my last rides, and I took the 29. I took it to high school every day for 4 years, and then when I got out into the working world, I took it for a while. And one of the last rides, it was probably like within weeks of when the first General showed up. I got off, and I would get off at Second Street, Second and Mars, and the center door opened and then fell out. One of the leaves just like fell out onto the street. There was a car parked there, just fell out, and of course the other leaf closed. And I started banging on the side of the coach, and I ran up and I said, like, you just lost half the door. And he said, oh, okay. Got out, like, picked it up, put it back into the coach, drove off. It's like, oh, it's like, all right, not a problem, I guess. No. So yeah, there were things happening then, and as Dave mentioned too about the white collar scheme. Yeah, not a fan of it, but they do keep it looking good, and I will give that. Yeah, that the vehicles look good and they keep looking clean, but it's just sort of,
And
could be different,
they,
but yeah.
they delivered the AM Generals at Southern Depot in the early months of 1980, and many of the drivers had been there for a lifetime down there. Okay. So they had a lot of trouble getting used to brand new coaches that they never thought they were going to have to drive. They have a very bad habit of locking the brakes all the time. You'd smell them burning when they were new because they're always fanning the brake just like they used to, but it was a very different brake system and they just couldn't adjust to that right away. That was could have been part of the problems that you said were electrical. They may have worked together. Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe.
And
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say that another thing, and it's the same thing on the Kawasaki cars. There's center door treadles, and it's not the treadles that we're used to. You press and they would actually move. These are just sensors. But if you left a small child behind you, the doors would close, and it wouldn't sense the small child. So if you ride the Kawasaki cars today, there's a sign like I forget exactly what it says, but let small child go first or something, because the doors will close on them. And the Generals had that, doors are closed, the driver would pull away. It's like, okay. So somebody had to run after their kid. They would run to the next block. So that was they got those signs after a while, but they had a lot of problems with the center doors on those. There were a lot of problems with the Generals. And when AM General started in the bus business back in the early 70s, and it got a huge order from Washington Metro when the Metro first took over the private companies. And those coaches work well, but a lot of properties had problems with them. A lot of properties swore by them. A lot of properties swore at them. So and a lot of those problems, that was the only generals that SEPTA operated at all, and they had a lot of problems with. But they seemed to work them out. They worked well over time. But again, you know, there were times when there weren't enough to, you know, to make the line or whatever. And as you said, at Southern it was tough because again, it's a 40-foot vehicle where there were the rolls were 5 feet shorter, 4 feet shorter. Getting around turns, tight corners, you know, parked cars was a big problem, and especially on the pullout because you had a number of turns on narrow streets. Where once you got on a line, 79, 29 were straight shots pretty much, but getting in and out of the barn sometimes was a little challenging, just because of you know, the length of the vehicles.
Uh, uh, on the AM Generals, did you get any pictures when they had the original thick fiberglass poles?
I think I have one, and it's one of those fuzzy ones that I probably wouldn't put in a presentation, but yeah. But I have one where 843 was one that probably never ran. And I have pictures of it. It sat in Southern's yard for a while. That got moved to Frankfurt's yard and started to get cannibalized. But I have a picture of it with a snap pole, and I think that's one of the ones that was fiberglass. But that was sort of the shock problem when operators would dewire. That was sort of the solution to that, but that didn't work either because the poles were just fragile. So, you know, if you dewired, the poles would come down to be retrieved, and sometimes if they came down hard, they would snap. So that was, yeah, again, trying to solve the electrical problem by going with something that wouldn't conduct electricity, but then wouldn't always stay intact. So, and I somebody told me another time where a line crew came out and actually like duct taped the pole together to get the coach running again. So I mean, and again, how could this work if it's being pulled by the retriever line and all? But that's, you know, you do what you have to do, I guess, to make the line. So,
Yeah, so fortunately, they still had poles that they're able to replace the fiberglass with regular poles.
yeah.
All righty. Any other questions or comments for Bob? Good
I
discussion
see,
here.
I see Captain, yeah, SEPTA does have a habit of turning lemons into lemonade. And it's happened a lot. It doesn't say a lot for the transit industry and the providers, unfortunately. Then the Proteras, again, that's the latest issue. But SEPTA does also turn lemonade into lemons sometimes, unfortunately. So it happens. So, but I will give it credit. It did try to keep the tracklesses as long as it could. There was sort of a pro diesel mentality that came in. Luther Diggs was one person I'll mention by name. He's no longer here to defend himself, but very staunch enemy of anything but a diesel bus. And I was involved in a number of projects like to extend 29 and 79 both to the east. They would have a common loading terminal point at Pier 70. It's a very popular shopping area. There's a Walmart there. A lot of people want to go there, and just flat out didn't want to hear anything. Just turned it down because, you know, no more stuff under wires. We can do it just as well with the diesel. So okay, you know. And yeah, Dave, you're right. Yeah, the hydrogen fuel cell buses are coming, and that might be what we see to replace the trolleys. The problem in Frankfurt is that FTA is going to want the investment to be life expired, and that, you know, the wires and everything that are put up are not quite 20 years old. I don't know what the life expectancy is, but SEPTA has mentioned that you know, it's going to buy more trackless trolleys. But of course, those things have changed though. So depending on how the hydrogen fuel cell bus program works, that could be the next. Yeah, that could be the end of the trackless system, possibly. But again, yeah, there's a number of moving parts in that, number of factors that have to be taken into account.
Yeah. Well, it's a fascinating system. Write it, photograph it while you can. I think here
Yeah.
in Pittsburgh, we're probably closer to Dayton's system than we are to Philly. But you know, we're pretty equidistant in between the two. So if you get a hankering for trackless trolleys, you can go either direction. And yeah.
Johnstown, surprisingly, you know, you had a small PCC fleet there. You also had a small trackless fleet there. So that was a very varied system when it was operating with those modes. And,
Yeah.
yeah, nobody would have ever guessed. But,
Yeah.
I see Tom has a question about, yeah, you're gonna have to wait till part one, Tom, because yeah, we're gonna talk about the system would have gotten much bigger if the plans in the early 50s made it to fruition. There would have been a lot more trackless. And I remember somewhere along the line, somebody came here when the AMGs, somebody I know came to the city to visit when the AMGs were starting to take over, and told him where to go to get him. And of course, he shows up in Center City, doesn't see it, a hint of a trackless. Like, where are these trackless routes? It's like not downtown. I told you exactly where you got to go. And he was just like, why didn't they come downtown? Like, that's the major routes. It's that again, Philadelphia is a little different. There's major routes downtown, but the rapid transit feeders are some of the most major routes. Like 66 was one of the top 10 passenger carrying routes for years. You could see downtown maybe if you squinted from Frankfurt Terminal, but it just served it served a majorly developed area as one of the through transit routes. And with the express service and everything, it was a very popular line. A lot of the line of choice. 59 was very similar, and they didn't take you downtown. They just took you to where you could get downtown, and that's the way the system worked. 29 and 79 were like that too, where you knew you could cross town and get to the subway and get downtown in minutes. So again, 29 and 79 were heavy carriers. They're not as they still carry a lot of passengers, but they're not what they once were. But 66, it's not in the top 10 anymore, but I think it's probably in the top 25. Still a very popular route.
Excellent. Well, I think we are going to wrap it up there. There at the end, that was a great teaser for part one of two, which you did not miss, as Bob mentioned earlier. So we're kind of going in reverse order here. We started with 1968 to present. We haven't set a date yet for part one, but we will schedule that sometime early in 2025. So stay tuned to our announcements through email. I want to thank everybody again for joining us today. Thank you so much to Bob for presenting and putting all that together. If you have an idea for Trolleyology, or if you would enjoy giving a program, please reach out to me. My email address is in the confirmation email that you got tonight, kfred@patrolley.org. I hope you can join us in the coming weeks or months on Zoom or at the museum. Thank you again and have a wonderful week. Bye, everybody.
Okay.